Now let's do a bit of a deeper dive into the concept of modifiers. But the key takeaway, like I mentioned in previous videos, like as long as you understand that every time you add a new modifier under your view, you're wrapping that in another view. And because of that, the order in which you put your modifiers on matter. So we'll take a deeper look at that, but that's really the concept at a high level. So back in our weather app, as an example, let's go to our weather button. And one thing that you may not have is I created a preview for our weather button. So just copy that text, put it in there to get a preview so we can actually see this while I'm talking about the modifiers. So like I said, the order matters, and I illustrated this before, but I'm going to show it to you again. So on text, we have our frame modifier, right? If I put the frame modifier last, so if I do Command X and down here, well, what happens is now that background and foreground color happens on the text itself, and then the frame gets added after the colors have already been put on, right? So I'm gonna put that back and kind of walk you through how this actually goes, right? And then I'll show it to you in code, and then I'll show you some visuals. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll get it. So what's happening is we have our text, then we add a frame to it, right? Then when we add our background color, the background color is actually getting added to this combined view of text and frame. Then you add the background color. Now foreground color gets added to the overall combined view of title or text, frame, background. And then you can see how we keep going, right? Font gets added to text, frame, background, foreground, right? I pictured this circle that you see on the screen here, right? Like you're just putting new views, wrapping around the existing views. And again, that's why the order really matters. So now for those of you that like to see it in code, like to see what's going on, let's go to the content view here. There's a modifier that we can put on our Z stacks and our V stacks called onAppear. This is kind of a preview. We're going to get more into that later. It's not about onAppear right now, but think of onAppear and there's an onDisappear, similar to like, view will appear, view did appear, view will disappear, similar to that, right? So on our Z stack here, that's what we're gonna use here. We're gonna use onAppear, and we're gonna go ahead and give it that closure. Now here in these, you can actually write all your Swift code, right? This is not a view builder, right? You can just write any code you want here to do onAppear. So we're gonna say let button equal weather button. And this is just to get a debug printout, by the way. You don't have to necessarily follow this. This is just so I can print out what the views are doing in the button in the debugger. Again, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. But you're going to do print type of, and then button.body, right? So we're printing out the body of our button, which again, if we go back to weather button, body is this right here. So we're going to print out what happens in this part of the code here. And we're going to do that when our Z stack appears. That's what onAppear does, okay? And we're going to get a printout in our console here. So I'm going to run it on the simulator to get the printout. There we go. Let me move this out of the way, move this up so you can see. So this is what all this modified content, that's what's going on with the wrappers. So let's copy and paste this, and I'm going to put it in my code here. It's going to give me all kinds of errors, but I think it'll be better if I lay it out this way. Again, you don't have to be following me doing this. This is just for explanation purposes. So I'm going to kind of unnest this. So at every modified content there, I'm going to make a new line, again, for illustrative purposes. Return there, return. And then hopefully this nesting makes it easier to kind of like see and understand what's going on. But basically the principle applies of what I talked about. It's how every time you add a modifier, you're wrapping it in a new thing. Here it is called modified content, right? If we count our modified contents, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, how many modifiers do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So like I said, every time you're adding a frame, a background, a new modifier to your object, it's getting wrapped in this modified content that you see here. So this was for those that like to see it in code. Again, I visualize this, circles wrapping circles kind of image that you see on the screen here. That's how I think of it, like as I'm adding my modifiers. That, whatever new modifier I add wraps all the existing views that I've already built, and so forth as I go out in the circle. Now back to our content view, I want to talk about two more things here. So back to the content view, you can see, right, environment key writing modifier. So there are these environment modifiers that are a little bit different than the normal ones, and let me show you them in action. So let me delete all this so Xcode can stop going nuts here. So we'll delete all that onAppear. Do a Command B so Xcode can stop freaking out with all that bad code. Let's go to our weather button. So let's pretend hypothetically, again, we're just kind of messing with our code. We're not like really building stuff. Let's put a V stack here. And let's say we wanted 2 buttons in our button for some reason, right? This is, you wouldn't really do this, but what I'm showing you is the environment. So there's many different ways to use the word environment in Swift UI, but for this environment, we're talking about everything within the VStack. And when you have multiple things like multiple text or multiple buttons, there are certain modifiers that you can put on the VStack overall that it'll apply to all the children like of that VStack. For example, foreground color, right? Let's Command X that and we'll put it onto the VStack overall. I can delete foreground color out of both of my individual buttons. And you see our preview. Okay, I forgot to add spacing onto our VStack. Spacing of 20, just to space those out so you can see. But you can see I basically refactored out foreground color and put it on the environment of the VStack so that all the children of the VStack will get that modifier. And to really drive the point home, let's do one more. Font is another one that we can put on the overall VStack and not each individual element if they're the same font, of course, right? If you have different fonts, you probably need them to be different. But again, that shows you environment modifiers that you can put on the environment of the VStack, HStack, whatever, to apply to all the children. And then lastly, there are like item specific modifiers, like text has a .bold. All right, so let's get rid of our font modifier real quick to show you how each individual one can have it because it has to do with text weight. So that put us at our default font weight. Well, modifiers that are specific to like a text, like for example, bold is one of them, .bold, right? You can see now that made our title bold. That was actually kind of hard to see, but I'll comment it out and recomment it so you can see the title changing, right? Okay, so watch what happens, right? Because bold is specific to text and because we're wrapping each view in a new view, right? Well, once I wrap it in, .frame, right, as my first modifier, I can't put .bold down here, right? I'll get an error, Command B. It's because value of type SumView has no member bold, right? Like text has .bold, but the combined, modified content of text and frame does not have a bold. So when you're using specific modifiers like that, you need to put them first. And again, those are specific to this example like bold and text. So that's an example of using the environment type modifiers and then specific modifiers. Now, there's a ton of modifiers out there. Some are environment, some aren't. Some are specific, some aren't. I don't recommend going through the entire list and trying to memorize like what's what. Again, I think as long as you remember what's going on, every time we add a modifier, we're wrapping that in a new view and as many times as needed, and that the order of the modifiers matter. If you remember those two key things, you're well on your way.